into the message. Now, I wanted to start off with the answer to Dave's question about the Jewish temple and history. So I did some research, and we all know that the first temple was the one that King David wanted to build for God. He said, it's not right that we all live in houses and you roam around in the Ark of the Covenant roams around in a tent. So David asked if he could build a temple in 1 Chronicles 17 in verses 1 through 15. And God said to him, no, you can't build the temple because you're a man of bloodshed. And King David, if King David only sinned once or twice, it might have been a different story, but he actually sinned a bunch of times. And even though God doesn't keep track, there were things that he told him, or that David knew better. Killing Uriah, it's one thing that he did what he did with Uriah's wife, but then to kill him the way he did, God wasn't too happy with him over that. But he did forgive him, but he did say there's going to be consequences, and one of them is that you cannot build a temple. So, when did that take place? That took place around 500, almost 600 BC, right? And by the way, that goes right in line with the minor prophets that we were talking about. It was King David was the second king of Israel after Saul, and then David took over, and then after David took over, it was Solomon. Solomon was the one that was allowed to build the temple. Now, David was allowed to gather the materials for Solomon to build it. And actually, yeah, it was 620, give or take, somewhere in that range. So Solomon's temple, which we find in 1 Chronicles 22, 2 through 5, talks about Solomon's temple that was built, and it was huge, and it was ornate, and it was the most magnificent structure probably ever built in the world at that time.
How many years do you think it took to build it?
40, 30. So, but there were thousands upon thousands of people that were involved in building it. And because Solomon was so smart, he had all the master craftsmen, and he had everything was, I picture from what I've read that he had this thing organized like a well-oiled job site. And they did what they had to do. Now, you don't really realize how big the temple was, but I've been watching some of the archaeology stuff going on in Israel right now, and they found some of the things that are talked about in here. They found, and one of the people that I follow, his name is Yishai Fleischer, and he's the spokesman for the community of Hebron, and he said they just found a tunnel, and this was the tunnel that was talked about, and he listed the verses where it was all talked about how they were able to do certain things. Now, you know that the temple was the place where they did the sacrifices, right? And when you do that many sacrifices, hundreds of thousands of sacrifices, a lot of blood. And nobody really thinks about, what happened to all that blood? Well, they had a whole waste system. And they found that too, where the water would come in, and then the water would wash the blood away. And they could just drop things into this area, and it was just a big, elaborate process. But when they were walking through this tunnel, I think this was in 2022, they started unearthing this tunnel, and they were finding different parts of it. They finally broke through to the other end, and then they went up the stairs, and they found out they were right by the western wall. And it took them 20 minutes to walk through this tunnel. That's how long it was. So when you think about how big this temple was, that it took 20 minutes to walk. It doesn't take me 20 minutes to walk to my house from here. So this temple and the grounds and the compound was enormous. So, and this was everything that was encompassed in the walls. So we know that Solomon's temple was destroyed and then ransacked by the Babylonians around 580. And we find that in 2 Kings 25:9. Now, it wasn't completely destroyed, but it was mostly destroyed. And but there were remnants. There was remnants of it. So what they did was they stripped the gold, they stripped the silver, all the precious metal. They took all of utensils and all of the, vessels that were in there. And they were able to get all that stuff and they took it back to Babylon, right? And then we know that when we saw a couple of weeks ago where Belshazzar was the one who brought those temple items out, that was from the temple, that was ransacked.
So we don't know where the Ark of the Covenant is.
No, God probably allowed that to be hidden forever. And, what's that? No, I don't believe
People
so.
have been trying for years.
I don't believe the ark will show up because God resides in our hearts, not in a box. And that's why we don't have a need for that anymore.
I think somebody's had it.
Somebody's got it? It's in their collection. So,
Amazon.
then we move into a little bit more of a modern period, which modern in the Old Testament sense, that King Cyrus of Persia allowed the temple to be rebuilt under the leadership of Zerubbabel, okay? And unfortunately, that temple was started, and that was Ezra, and that was Nehemiah, and I started reading Ezra, and I started reading Nehemiah. And that temple was done, like they repaired the walls, they repaired the gates, and then they kind of repaired the temple. But there was some things that were different about it. And so I'll read you what somebody had put in there about this. And it says, over the next 400 years, a series of Gentile rulers alternately built up and defiled the second temple, right? So this is, the first temple's gone. We're now only talking about the second one. The cycle culminated in 39 BC battle in which King Herod took control of the temple, slaughtering many of the priests and defenders in the process, but also keeping the Roman soldiers from entering the sanctuary. Herod proposed to renovate the temple in 20 and 19 BC. His reason being the post-exilic temple was 60 cubits shorter than Solomon's original temple. Despite the Jews' fears that he meant to tear it down and never rebuild, the main work of the temple was completed in 1.5 years and the outer courtyard in 8 years. Finishing touches continued until AD 63. Now this is after Jesus was gone, but the temple was substantially completed when Jesus walked the earth, and when he went into the temple and the money money changers that were in the temple, that was the temple that Cyrus and through Zerubbabel and Ezra and Nehemiah had rebuilt and put together. So that's the second temple. Now, it wasn't very long after that, and by the way, that's called Herod's Temple. Herod's Temple then was a restoration and expansion of Zerubbabel's second temple, but it was the same place, okay?
Not the third.
Not the third, no, same temple. So what happened was they restored it. They restored a little bit of it, then they restored a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. It never had the grandeur of the original temple, which, by the way, ticked a lot of people off, that this was not the same place, and that's why he had, Nehemiah had people, distractors, that were trying to take away from him, because he's like, well, we're trying to rebuild and do this good work for God, and he's like, well, the second temple's not anywhere near as grand as the first temple. And, it took years. It took 400 years to get it to the point where they would consider it complete. Now it was 60.
Why would Herod want to build it? Was it for him?
Probably for a everlasting thing. Like look through history, we call it Herod's Temple, right? That's probably what he wanted. He probably wanted it there. Now he didn't want. It also could have been an offering to God, saying, "I'll do this for you, so you don't, I'll earn brownie points, right?" And because he didn't desecrate it by having the Roman soldiers go in there. They weren't allowed in there at all. So, but unfortunately, 7 years later, in 70 AD, the second temple was destroyed completely. And at that time, after a long war between the Jewish zealots and the Roman authorities, 4 Roman legions led by Titus besieged Jerusalem and burned down the temple. So here's an interesting part of that. As the temple burned, the gold and silver ornamentation melted and seeped between the cracks in the stone. In their zeal for a stipend, the Roman soldiers took the temple apart stone by stone, fulfilling Jesus' prophecy in Matthew 24, 1-3, that says that not one stone will be left upon the other. But that's not true, because the western wall is still there.
Yeah.
So there is still part of that temple that is there. Now, I did look to see what's the current status on the third temple, because the Jews that believe that they're entitled to the land want to restore the temple. Now, what I didn't realize is that all of the temple structure, courtyard, and everything is buried under 40, 50, 60 feet of dirt. And then the Dome of the Rock, that's the Muslim place, is built on the site of the temple. And when Jesus comes and steps his foot back on the earth, there's going to be an earthquake. The Mount Olivet's going to split in two, and it's going to rip that Dome of the Rock right in half. So I guess it's going to be after that the third temple has been rebuilt. But there are a group of people, and there's actually a group, I didn't put their name down because I think it's kind of insignificant, that no current work is being performed on the third temple, but the religious Jews are in the planning stages and have been for years, as they feel the Messiah can't come until the temple is rebuilt. What they don't realize, the Messiah came already. And these are the religious ones, the same religious ones who rejected Jesus back in the day when he walked the earth, are the same ones that are rejecting everything that's in the New Testament today. But they'll all be believers in the end. That's all I can say. So,
Interesting.
yeah, I wanted to get that question answered for Dave because, you know, it was important to know that what the status of everything is.
That western wall is questionable. Could be. I'm not saying it is or it isn't.
Could be.
Because how you mentioned it, that they took the whole temple down. But yet that
Right.
wall is still there.
Right.
Even Josephus even described that.
Right.
You couldn't tell what was there.
Right.
But yet the wall was there. But that's this particular wall where they prayed. People had suggested that that was part of the Roman garrison building.
Right. It was actually
They wouldn't tear down their own garrison thing.
they say it was the extension that he added back onto the temple to make it back the same size as in Solomon's day.
So they will start sacrificing again?
Yes. When the temple is rebuilt, they want to reinstitute sacrifices. So there's something about a red heifer. And apparently there are no red heifers, but they can genetically create one. But you're not allowed to import it back into Israel. I was reading, I didn't take notes on it, but I was reading it, and I left the page open on my computer at home. They need the red heifer, so they have to,
What's a red heifer?
it's a red
Red cow?
cow.
But
And
why would that be allowed this day and age?
Well,
Sacrifice like that? I mean,
it's not
against
here in the
the
United
law.
States, it's over there in a foreign country, because that's part of their religious practice. One thing people don't realize, and I didn't realize it myself either, that Israel is not a religious nation. They are not, the Jews that live there, a good portion of them are not religious. The only reason that you see a lot of people walking around with the 4 tassels hanging out, wearing the white and wearing the hat, or even wearing a yarmulke, those people are the religious ones. The reason you see them on the news all the time is because they're the ones that are going to the places, they're the where people go and visit and, you know, sightsee. But when you get into Israel proper, the whole nation and what is it, Judea and Samaria and Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and all of the, you know, Haifa, all of those places, they're not religious people. They're just people, they're just Jews that wanted their own nation because they were, you know, I didn't know this until recently, and more recently in my adult life, that the reason that the Jews wanted their own nation was because they wanted to be able to defend themselves from what happened during the Holocaust. And there was a lot of talk in the early 19th century, beginning of the 19th century, that the Jews were starting to come back to the land. And there's a lot of contention of whose land it was. But the one thing to remember, and this is very important when it comes to the history, there was no nation there. None. That land was a barren wasteland that nobody wanted. Now, there were people that lived there, but they didn't live in cities. There were no big cities built up and things like that. Nobody lived there. There was no nation, no currency, no gross domestic product, no government, no nothing.
Well, who's controls it on?
It was not really under anybody's control.
Was it under Arabs?
Well, when you go way back during, way back, you had the Persians owned part of it, and then you had, the Babylonians owned part of it.
But I'm
it's-
not talking about like,
some of it was under Syrian control. I don't think Egypt ever went that far up. Saudi Arabia.
was any Ottoman Empire
There was-
had it for?
Yeah, so there was these border lines that existed from other nations, never really took over and never really settled in. If you go to maps of 1600, 1500, 1700s, there's nothing there. Nothing. Now, when the Jews wanted to go back to their ancestral homeland, which is Judea and Samaria, which is actually the West Bank, what they call the West Bank, wrongly so, and saying, well, they're settlers there. They're not settlers there. If you go back to Genesis 23 and you read about the tomb of the patriarchs that Abraham bought, that tomb is still there. And the bodies are still buried in that tomb. So anyone can say that it's not part of the Jewish homeland. It certainly is, but yet they call it occupied territories. It's not occupied by the Jews, it's occupied by the Arabs. Now, it's a very convoluted thing that took place before World War II, during World War II, and after World War II. But when they wanted their independence, it was so that nobody could come in and do to the Jewish people what they did. An interesting statistic that I found from doing some of this research is that had the Holocaust not occurred, there would probably be 25 to 40 million Jews around. But because the Holocaust occurred, the ones living in Israel right now, there's about 8 to 9 million Jews. So when they wipe them out, they really wipe them out. I mean, the population goes way down. And one of the reasons why they don't fight harder for some of these areas, there's just not enough people to occupy the areas. But they're willing to live in harmony, and they've always been willing to live in harmony with the Arabs, the non-jihadist Arabs. And the non-jihadist Arabs are willing to live in harmony with the Jews as well. After all, they're related. But the problem came in when Yasser Arafat came in and said, we really want our own place. Nobody cared about that place for thousands of years. Then all of a sudden, the Jews are going to move back in, and all of a sudden, everybody wants control of that land. And so, but Yasser Arafat was the one who came in there and said, you guys should have your own place. Let's wall this off. Let's take over Judea and Samaria. And let's call it the West Bank. Because the thinking is that if people call it Judea and Samaria, it sounds biblical, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Right? But if you call it the West Bank, I only found this out 4 years ago, that the West Bank is Judea and Samaria, and I only found out a year ago that Bethlehem is in the West Bank, and that you can't go there. You want to go there and visit Bethlehem, the birthplace of Jesus? Nope, not happening. I mean, you might be able to get special permission to go in there. If you want to go into the, right now, praying is forbidden at the Temple Mount. You can't go up there and pray.
They're all afraid of.
The Arabs, not today. That was those pictures you see of those people. They can get special permission to go up to the place, but that is all under Arab
What
control.
about the wall?
They have half of the year the Arabs control it, the other half of the year the Jews control it, and it was just all over the news. The guy went up to the wall and he decided, I'm going to pray right here, and the rest of
Oh,
it.
so they're not praying at the wall anymore?
No, not like you see in those other pictures. Yeah, it's because it's ticking people off, and they don't want to tick people off. The Jews have become big appeasers. The Israelis, they don't want to cause trouble. They just want to live in harmony. So if they have to make rules that restrict their people, like I said, they're not religious. The nation itself is not a
I'm
religious place.
surprised. I'm
Yep,
shocked.
me too. I'm very surprised. And the burial site of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is all under our control. And you're allowed, like, if you want to go visit, you got to get permission, and you'll get escorted in by guards, and you can only go during certain times. There's a lot of things that go on over there, because there's rabble-rousers who want to get out there and cause trouble for the Jews, because they just have immense hatred just because they call themselves Jews. So it's been a real eye-opener to see what goes on over there, but I'm still amazed that you can actually, the oldest book in the Bible, right? The book of Genesis, you go back and you read Genesis 23, where the nation of Israel started with Abraham, and God said, I'll create a nation out of you where your people will be as numerous as the sands of the sea. And then when he died, he was buried, and you could go to that same exact spot where his tomb is, the tomb of the matriarchs and patriarchs of the Jewish religion. So it's interesting, but that the world is trying to make it so, first of all, if you prove that any part of the Bible is true, that must mean that there's a God, even if it's just a God of Israel. And if there's a God, then we're all in trouble for the way we've been living, like there is no God in this world. So the whole idea is to de-religionize everything that goes on over there. And even the Jews, even the religious Jews, are completely unaware of what's going on. When they think that Christianity is, we're worshiping three gods, they have no clue. We don't worship three gods. It's one God. And they have no idea about certain things, even, like in their own culture. There's just a lot of things that they just don't get. And it's sad because, when you think about it, you think about that these are God's people. They were supposed to bring the word of God to the world. That's what, people, you ask a Jew, you're God's chosen people, what are you chosen to do? Some of the religious ones will tell you what they were chosen to do. The guy I watch, he's not a Christian, he's a Jew, he's a religious Jew. And he says, our job is to bring the Jewish religion to the world. And in some regards, that's true. That was, but you need to bring it more modern today, and today's modern is Christianity. I've likened it like this. I had a person I used to talk to many years ago at the Yeshiva High School. And I said, the difference between Judaism and Christianity is like we're going on a vacation. We're going to go on a month-long vacation. We're both going to the same place. You're going to this place, we're going to this place, and we can talk about, oh, did you see this? Did you see this? Yeah. At the end of the month, you say, okay, we're done with our vacation, we're going home. I go, wait, there's more.
Right.
Come on, let's go look at the rest of it. And you guys are like, no, that's all we want to see. There's nothing else to see here. Whereas Christianity says, wait, there's the whole other side. And they don't see it. They don't see that other side. They don't want to look beyond it. They believe that Jesus was a good prophet, but that he was not the Messiah and the Son of God. And they still don't believe that today.
What about blindness over
The
Lord for that whole.
Some, because some of them remove their blinders and get saved. Those are the Jews that become Christians, and I'm one of those. Now, I was never a religious Jew because my mom was a rebel, my mom and her sister, because both of my great-grandparents, my grandmother's father and my grandfather's father, were both rabbis. So we come from a religious Jewish heritage, and my grandparents were, they moved to the United States from wherever they were, and it was somewhere, Poland and Russia, that area over there, and they moved over here, and they never really taught my mom and her sister, and they both became rebels. My grandfather was bar mitzvahed when he was 14, or whatever, 14 years of age, and all of my relatives were. All of the relatives that grew up on my grandmother and my grandfather's side of the family all were. So the ones that weren't was my mom, her sister, she had 3 kids, and my mom had me and my sister, and we weren't really taught anything, although we did celebrate Hanukkah growing up when we were kids. But that was the only other one. I didn't find out until I met people at this yeshiva high school that there are, my grandfather actually told me years later, but I was already an adult, married, and had kids, that there are religious holidays, which are solemn holidays, and then you have festive holidays. And there's a big difference between the two, but you can't go more than about 15 days in the Jewish calendar without there being some type of celebration. The Jewish people celebrate everything. I mean everything. And there's nothing wrong with it. But if they think that the celebration of these things is going to endear them to God or bring them closer to God, they're mistaken. You know, like they had this one holiday, it's called Sukkot, and what they do is they build a shed in their driveway, and they're supposed to live in it for a weekend. I think it's a weekend. It might be a whole week. And so when you drive into places like Highland Park or areas of Princeton, you know, where the Jewish communities congregate together, you see these like wooden sheds with a tarp roof, and come out of the house, there's the extension cord, because they gotta have their TV, and they gotta have their coffee
What's
maker.
the purpose of that?
Well, they're supposed to live like they were back out in the wilderness, I guess.
Well, that's
My
not
friend had
right.
a rental
TV.
property. My friend had a rental property in Elbon.
Right.
He sold it.
And it's catered.
And they had this here thing. And I thought it looked like a dumpster at first. I said, what the heck is this? They want to buy it.
Yeah, it looks,
He
I
said,
mean,
I'll let the tenants put it up. And I walk inside, they have picture posters of the rabbis and stuff like that. And,
Yeah.
you know.
So while there's nothing wrong with these celebrations, and there's nothing wrong with the solemn traditions, unless this stuff is directing their heart back toward God, and you know, all they have to do to get their heart directed back toward God is just open up the book of Psalms and read what the Psalms were talking about when you turned yourself away from God, you became as the wicked. And I'm actually going to probably formulate an email to the guy, Yishai Fleischer, who lives in Israel, but I think he was born in Brooklyn. And I'm going to send him an email about some of the Psalms that I've read. And what do you think about that? You know? So I'm trying to pick out some good ones. There are 160.
What about Isaiah? I mean, there's another one that policy.
Yeah, they don't believe. Let's put it this way: they believe the same thing as like the Arabs do. With the Arabs, the religious ones that all believe that there's got to be some kind of what do they call it? Caliphate, which would then usher in the new millennium. But they have some really weird things. Like they have, I heard one the other day about, they're supposed to go out and kill every Jew except the ones hiding behind a certain tree, but even the tree will turn them in by saying there's a Jew hiding behind me and you need to go kill him. Just some weird stuff. I think that, this is long before the Quaalude days, but I'm sure LSD existed back in the day, because whoever came up with some of this Islamic religion things was just weird. I mean, it goes beyond weird.
Joe, when Jesus comes back and sets up his kingdom here for the Jews, are they still gonna do,
Sacrificing? No, but they're going to start sacrificing during the tribulation period. When the 144,000 come back, they're going to reinstitute the sacrifices, and they will do that. They'll get away with it for 3.5 years, but then the Antichrist will turn on them and chase them all out. Once that happens, that animal sacrifice will be over. But once Jesus comes to set up his millennial kingdom here, the 1,000-year millennial reign, there will be no sacrifice, because at that point they'll all know that Jesus was the Messiah and that there's nothing left to wait for. So unfortunately they're missing out on 2,000 years of all the good things that could have happened had the nation turned, repented, and looked to Jesus as their salvation. But unfortunately God's going to have to get a hold of them, and in the end times You know, the 7 years, remember the tribulation is not for us, the tribulation is for the Jews. And it's the 70th week of Daniel, we're gonna get into that in a couple of weeks. I'm putting together, you know, that part of it. And, we're up to chapter 7 we can get to tonight, but I figured we would, I wanna get,
No, that was good, I like
Yeah,
hearing
that
that.
was interesting.
yeah, I wanted to get David's answer, but I also wanted to bring you up to what the modern stuff that goes on today. And, I knew that there was a group trying to build a third temple, but I thought they were a little bit further along than they are right now, but they're not, and that's because the temple site is not under Jewish control.
They could never make it like it was.
Oh, no, no.
That would never be.
They're gonna do a pretty good job from what I hear. But I mean, you have no idea how big this is. I'm trying to find the dimensions of it. I mean, I can find the dimensions of Solomon's old temple, because they give you how big each of the things were, but in one part of Solomon's temple, the ceiling was 70 feet high. This is 20. That means it's 4 times the height of this. You go to Ocean Grove, into the big grand auditorium, that's not even 70 feet high. It's unbelievable how tall 70 feet is. Yeah, it's crazy. So yeah, you're right, it will never be as grand as Solomon's temple, but, so anyway, God has a plan, and he's working on it, and we're getting to see parts of it unfold before our very eyes. So anyway, any questions?